Hey guys, welcome back to r/maliciouscompliance. In this video, an entitled boss makes the biggest mistake of her career when she targets a disabled employee who has been with the company for 20 years. She calls him deadweight, humiliates him publicly, and even dares him to quit. But what she doesn't realize is that this deadweight is the only person who knows how to run the system that keeps the entire company operational. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled, "Tell Your Boss That You're Quitting." This is not my story but my mother's. She died recently at the age of 89 and my sister and I were reminiscing. This is one of our favorite stories involving our mom. My brothers called her V because her first name begins with V, so I'll refer to her as V. So this happened many years ago, about the time I graduated from high school. V had taken a job, her first since she and my dad got married, in a public kindergarten. Now, my dad was always a bit of a bully, especially towards my mom. My dad was not a nice person, and that's a whole story in itself. Either way, V had survived ovarian cancer at the age of 33, so she was probably about 38 or 39 when this happened. Now my dad insisted that if she was gonna hold down a job, she still had to do all her chores when she got home. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, etc. I cannot remember exactly what prompted the argument about her chores, but something did not get done that he expected and demanded that she do. He informed her that she would tell her boss that she was quitting when she went back to work the next day. Before he left for work the next day, he reminded her that she was to tell her boss that she was quitting. Cue malicious compliance. I loved my mom. She went to work that morning, stepped at her boss's office and said these exact words. "My husband said to tell you that I was quitting," and then moseyed on to her classroom. A few minutes later, her very puzzled boss popped in and asked her if she was serious, and she said, "No, but my husband told me to tell you that I was quitting, so I did." And no, she did not quit her job until she was good and ready several years later. And yeah guys, if you enjoy these light-hearted malicious compliance stories, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. The next one is also from r/maliciouscompliance and is titled, "Nightmare Karen Boss Fires Me Since I Am Old and Disabled. Big mistake." I will begin with a bit of background. I've worked at this company for 20 years, far long enough to be considered loyal. As the years have gone on, my body has aged as naturally happens, and around 5 years ago, I unfortunately lost the mobility of my legs. I can walk a short distance, but mostly spend my time in a wheelchair. This has never been an issue with my work, as it is an office job. The rest of my colleagues certainly don't have an issue with my disability. Well, throughout my time working for this company, my level of clearance has risen, along with my position and pay. Currently, I monitor and control the main system the company uses. I won't get too technical, but it's the system that all the sales and client relations depend on, so it's fairly crucial to the company. This is also when I should note that I'm currently the only person who knows how to properly run it. 1 year ago, my boss retired and was replaced by Karen. She has countless years of experience and is more than qualified, so that was not the issue. The issue was that she did not seem very capable of being friendly. From the day she started, she gave almost everyone nasty looks and insulted their work, despite it being up to standard. She just didn't seem to want to be there, despite having clearly applied and gone through countless rounds of interviews. We were all very confused by her attitude. My first encounter with her is one I won't forget. So I was on my way to my office and noticed her standing inside when I arrived. My door opened automatically, something which was fitted upon losing mobility. I remember seeing Karen turn, slowly cast her gaze downwards, and all but scowl at my state. I felt so small beneath that gaze, but more than that, I felt ashamed and I did not even know why. She continued staring at me until eventually I cracked and politely asked her what she was doing here, while I made my way over to the other side of my desk. She took in a deep breath, scowling further when she realized I was heading to the other side. "You work here?" she asked eventually, completely ignoring my question. I told her I do, informing her of what my position was. I also assumed that she was my new boss, so directly asked her if that was who she was. She nodded, giving me a tight-lipped smile while she looked me up and down once more. "What can I do for you?" I asked after even more awkward silence. "I'm introducing myself to all of my new employees," I held in a remark because she had not really introduced herself at all. I figured that maybe she was just awkward, some people are like that, and tried at introducing myself again, this time directly asking for her name. "Karen," she replied and downright rolled her eyes at me. That is when I knew she was being rude on purpose. What was her deal? "Sorry, have I done something to upset you?" I asked. She was instantly taken aback by this, clearly not expecting that sort of remark. She shook her head a few times, muttering, "The cheek," before she closed her eyes with a sigh. "Who let you work here?" "I guess the boss 20 years ago?" I replied, really unsure where this conversation was going. She strolled around my office, letting her finger glide over every surface so that any dust would stick to her finger. Once she had touched perhaps my entire office, she raised her finger and grimaced at the smallest piece of dust. "You're clearly dead weight," she stated, making me freeze. What?" I asked. She sighed again, before carelessly explaining to me that I was clearly unable to pull my weight because of my disability. I asked her to clarify, which only made her continue her discriminatory remarks with no logic attached. She claimed I was lazy and clearly did not need the wheelchair. At this point, I was just getting offended and hoped that she would leave. Eventually, she did. The rest of the day, I was in a sour mood and hoped she would not come back. She didn't, although the comments heard they were not half as bad as the ones she would make the following days. It was the night of my colleague's birthday. He was hosting a small get-together at a pub close by to the office. So of course we all headed there right after work, including Karen. She ignored me during the journey over, mindlessly chatting to some of the others. Through the night, the drinks kept on coming, and soon Karen was rather tipsy. "Deadweight, get around!" she yelled, pointing at me with a snarl. I was already planning on getting around, but that comment was so not needed. The table got silent and everyone looked over, confused as to whether that was some inside joke or something else. I brought everyone around and then left, deciding it was about time to go home anyway. The next day, a few of my colleagues approached and asked what happened the day prior. I informed them that I didn't think she was just joking around and that although I didn't want to make a big deal of anything, she was clearly trying to be rude. Later that day, we had a team meeting which was attended by most of my colleagues and superiors. On the way in, Karen whispered, "Deadweight," to me. It honestly felt like I had a high school bully. She glared at me throughout the meeting, and the moment I began speaking, she calls out, "Absolutely not. Do not let that disabled deadweight speak his mind. I care not to hear it." The room was silent, so she decided to continue. "Oh, come on, he's just old and broken." That did not help her, only causing more jaws to drop. The meeting ended quickly, mainly because nobody knew how to continue after that. On the way out, when I just wanted to escape, Karen grabbed the handle of my wheelchair to spin me around. She screamed, "You're old and disabled, dumbass. Nobody needs you here. We would be better off without you. I dare you to quit. See who would care. Or better yet, you know what? Since I know you won't quit voluntarily, I will just fire you." She spat before pushing me away. I was left a bit confused. Was I really fired or was she just raging for no reason? I went home in a rage, angry and upset that she would treat me this way considering my vital role to this company. That is when I decided to comply with her. This is what she wanted. She wanted me to quit, so I rang HR and instead of quitting, I informed them that I had fallen ill and needed to take some sick days off. I took 2 weeks off, going completely silent from the company. My phone quickly began blowing up with missed calls, especially from Karen, who was relentlessly calling, messaging and emailing me. I did not open a single notification. Once those 2 weeks were up and I was feeling better, I came back to the office. People were literally running around, faces red, and people were shouting. Clients were in the rooms shouting and making all sorts of gestures. Even our CEO was in the building, angrily asking for some order. When people finally noticed I was there was a moment of silence before there was even more shouting, this time at me. It was less shouting and more pleading. "Please get the system back up and running. There's been some sort of glitch and sales are going through for mere pennies. Others for triple the cost." A few hours later, this is what I can tell you, everything had gone wrong. Production went down, practically all of our clients were angry or upset, suppliers had dropped us and our costs had skyrocketed while profits crashed to the floor. "You!" Karen yelled, storming over to me. "What did you do?" "I did not do anything," I replied, because that was the truth. I literally didn't do anything. She sputtered over her words, mixed between shouting at me and just sputtering pure nonsense. "You dared me to quit and kind of fired me," I shrugged. "So instead I thought I would show you what it would be like. I'm doing you a favor by coming back and sorting your mess out." The CEO was suddenly behind me asking if I was the man they were all looking for. I confirmed, stating that I was gonna sort out the mess. He thanked me, clearly trying to sound professional while his company nearly collapsed. I then rushed into my office, locked the door, and spent the next few hours fixing the system and telling certain people which clients they should deal with. I did more than Karen had done since starting, something I was glad the CEO was here to see. Once everything was back in order, said CEO came into my office and shook my hand. "Thank you," he sighed, and I knew he meant it. "I think there are bigger things here for you." Karen walked in after that, telling me just how thankful she was that I was able to sort everything out. Now was my chance though. "That's funny, I thought I was old and broken," I asked, watching as she continued to sputter. The CEO looked at her, clearly waiting for an explanation. She tried her best to get out of the situation, but it was clear he was not buying it. That is when I explained how she had treated me since she had arrived and the names she had been calling me. I brought in a few of my colleagues who confirmed what I was saying, and considered most of them were at the team meeting, there were many who saw the worst of it. The CEO was going red in the face from anger, while Karen was going red from embarrassment. How did she ever think she would get away with such discrimination and insulting behavior? "You cannot believe this man, he's just an old cripple," she stammered, sealing her grave with one final insult. As you can probably imagine, the CEO was outraged, even more so when another colleague knocked on the door and informed him that the past 2 weeks of chaos had cost the company $300,000. Now that he knew who the culprit of the chaos was, Karen, he fired her on the spot. "Get out!" he yelled the moment she opened her mouth to defend herself. "You've worked here for 20 years and clearly you're a vital part of this company. How do you feel about becoming the new boss of this team?" the CEO asked. I was honored, gladly accepting the new title and raise. He apologized for the way Karen had acted, something I also had no issues accepting. I don't know what happened to Karen, but all I can hope is she learned her lesson and has changed from her discriminatory ways. And the next one is another story from r/maliciouscompliance, and it is titled "Boss Won't Approve Overtime, so I work exactly 40 hours per week until I tried to quit." And by the way, guys, I'm curious, let me know in the comments, do you enjoy the malicious compliance stories that are kind of workplace/company/awful boss related? If you do, let me know in the comments and I will read more of them. So, when I was in my 20s, I worked at a tiny coffee/wine bar establishment. It sold coffee in the mornings and had a wine/beer license for the evening crowd. Its selling point was that it had food pairings for all of its drinks, both coffee and alcohol. It was a fairly new business, only a year old. It had a bare-bones staff and the owner herself tended the bar in the evenings, usually solo because the tips were better and she could keep them all for herself. I was one of the 2 baker/chef/line cooks making all the food to be paired with the drinks. We always worked opposite each other and split the day and night shift, so we each had some evenings free. The owner was a 40-something single lady with no food service background or experience. She very proudly stated that she invented every recipe on the menu, but her inexperience was obvious. For example, her cupcake icing was 50% Crisco, stuff like that. She came from the corporate world and had turned her hobby into a business as a middle finger to her old bosses. She was always complaining about being single, about money troubles, about how hard the work was, about her life in general. It was just so much negativity. My boyfriend at the time would sometimes come in towards the end of my evening shifts, buy an overpriced beer at the bar, and we would leave together. I could see the jealousy on her face every damn time. The owner hated paying overtime and got on my case any week I had any overtime, even if it was 15 minutes. I had been in kitchens since I was 15, so by now I was a seasoned chef who could easily do 12 hours without even looking at the clock. This was the first place I'd worked at where I had such an inexperienced boss and wasn't expected to do 60+ hours per week. I finally had enough of her nitpicking, and here's where the malicious compliance kicks in. I started noting the exact time I clocked in, and on a big piece of masking tape I would write the exact time 8 hours later that I would clock out. I would put that piece of tape right in front of my station where everyone could see, and so would she. If I clocked in at 12:58 p.m, you bet your buns I was clocking out at 8:58 p.m, evening rush be damned. If someone ordered food after I left, she either had to make it herself or tell them the kitchen was closed, which defeated the purpose of having food pairings in the first place. She was the one who made the schedule, so it's not like I made things more difficult for her on purpose. Her lack of experience led to her being severely understaffed at crucial times, and by that point I didn't care enough to enlighten her. She would not pay us overtime, but she also would not hire more people, so stuff just did not get done. After a few months of this, I was done working there and quickly found a new job. I told them I could start in 2 weeks, so I could give notice to my old job as a professional courtesy. I typed up a generic resignation letter that had my end date 2 weeks later. I gave it to the owner, and when she came in near the end of my shift, when I clocked out, she said not to bother coming in the next day. I was fired. I shrugged and left. I decided to take the 2 weeks as a staycation of sorts. At a friend's suggestion, I applied for unemployment, since I was technically fired, and actually got benefits for 1 week before starting my new job. So it was like a paid vacation, which is unheard of in the food world. Well, last I heard, the place closed after 10 years because she was not making money and she went back to the corporate world. She did get married, so yay for that. I wish her nothing but the best. She was not a bad person, just bad at being a boss. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So I was living in an HOA a couple of years ago that took things further than I would have ever imagined to happen in my neighborhood. For some backstory, the HOA board before them were all getting older and one by one stepping down and giving up the positions to younger people that seemed to all want the position for the control and not to actually help any of the families involved. They started making new stricter rules, claiming that it was keeping us safer, but to me it felt more and more like I was living in some kind of police state, constantly being watched by them as they waited for somebody to break one of their rules just so they could get money from us. I'm aware that most of these other HOA stories take place in America, and the law there might be a little better regarding what an HOA can and cannot do. I live in a country in South America though, and here the HOAs get a lot more freedom. Either because they tend to give money and bribe police, or the police themselves are just too busy to care about it. Sometimes an HOA does not seem any better than a gang just controlling a neighborhood and extorting money from people. I was part of a good one until the new people took over and just seemed to care about themselves. The 5 main enforcers for the leader of the HOA would ride up and down the streets on motorcycles wearing jackets that claimed they were security. They would tell kids to stop playing football out in the yards and that they would break something and be in big trouble. They told old ladies to not plant vegetable gardens unless they were willing to give half of whatever grew to the HOA. They were just horrible people, and I was not happy living under them with my wife and kids, but we didn't have anywhere else to go. So I was dealing with it and hoping to stay under the radar and one day move or hope that somebody better took over. Well, instead, the HOA tried to make a new rule that I knew was not legal to begin with, and I did not want them to do. They were basically going door to people claiming they had to be let in so they could do an inspection and make sure that the inside of our homes was following all the rules. They got to my door and I was not about to let them in with 3 young kids upstairs and my wife in the kitchen, plus I knew if I let them in they would take anything valuable they wanted. HOA, you need to open the door and let us in to inspect it. Me, you don't have the right to enter my home. I'm refusing to let you in. HOA said, our HOA police officers have the right to search your house. I knew they were not actually police, but they had started calling themselves that to further scare people. Me, leave now. You cannot come into my home just to take a look around. HOA, for this house we have direct orders. The HOA president has banned firearms in the community. We need to come in and search for them as you're a known gun owner. Having guns where I live is not really uncommon, by the way. I don't do anything illegal with them, but I have a few guns that I do legally own, a large hunting rifle, a small handgun, and a shotgun I also use for hunting purposes. All of which are kept locked away so that the kids have no ability to gain access to them. Me, my guns are legal and the HOA cannot make the decision to take them away. Now get away from my property. HOA, we're gonna search that house one way or another, just you wait. They left and I was stuck with their threat and a whole lot of worry about what might happen in the future. If they break in, I could call the police, but there's no guarantee that they show up in time or if the HOA is bribing them to stay out of their business. It got so complicated that sometimes even my head spins with what the world has become. A couple nights later, it was about 2 in the morning and we were woken up by the front door being busted down. The men, now wearing bulletproof vests and trying to cover their faces, started screaming that they were police and for us to get on the ground. They all had guns and were pointing them at all of us, even my 3-year-old little girl. I know they wanted me to not know who they were, but I was paying attention and I knew exactly who it was and that they were not police. I got a policy where I don't try and fight somebody that has a gun pointed at my family. That is just not gonna happen. They found where I kept the guns, and instead of even asking me for the keys, they just took the entire box that the guns were stored in with them. As if they thought they were being clever, and I couldn't guess what it was the HOA doing this and not the actual police. Which again, might seem strange, but here it can happen where it is police doing this kind of thing. They also stole some gold jewelry that my wife had and my watch before leaving. Of course, they couldn't leave without turning to us, guns still pointed, opening their dumb mouth. HOA police, we are confiscating all all of these items as they go against the HOA rules and create a bad environment. Me, can you tell me why they're being confiscated when I legally own all of that stuff? HOA guy, guns and fancy items can be associated with crime, so the president is confiscating all of it to create a crime-free neighborhood. I did not want to respond again because he seemed to be getting angry and there was zero point in reasoning with him. We both knew that this line was a lie that he was forced to rehearse. The HOA president just wanted some guns and nice things to either pawn off for money or even keep for himself. It was abuse of power, but I just wanted these guys out of my house before they could do any more damage. My kids were crying and scared out of their minds because of what happened. The door was busted right off the hinges and I would have to buy a new one the next day and leave my house open and exposed for the rest of the night. I had a thought and got into my car without putting the lights on. I drove to where I knew the HOA guys usually hung out and managed to get some photos of them more clearly with my gun box and the HOA president. I knew that if I wanted to make sure they could not buy their way out of this, I need to have some solid evidence. The next day I went to the police and filed a report explaining what had happened. Once they had heard that the HOA guys were pretending to be police, that is when they actually got interested in the case and wanted to investigate things. I think that's something universal that will get people in trouble and real cops riled up. If you pretend to be a cop when you are not one, I know that they can get pretty angry and want to retaliate. I gave them the pictures and they took down my story and told me that they would get back to me. Of course, I also wanted to press charges against the men for breaking into my house and for robbery, plus I was suing the HOA board later as a whole because of the photo I had proving that the president told them to go and do this. Of course, they all denied it ever happening, but the police were angry about being impersonated, so their probable plan for a bribe was not gonna end up working out. The HOA's main place got raided and my guns were found and brought in as more evidence against them. I think the funny part is that later in court, the HOA president tried to claim that these were his guns and I stole them from him the night before. Well, thankfully I had the paperwork showing when I had gotten them and that they had been in my name for years. So then he tried to argue that his nickname was the same as my actual name and that they were really his. It was not working though, and I think that they offered the president some type of deal that at least kept him out of jail for as long as the others were. It meant that he had to admit what he did, but that the 5 guys were the only ones that actually broke into the house and took anything. He was the mastermind behind it, but he did not technically steal anything, so by telling on his own friends he managed to save his butt a little bit. They were all going to jail, but the 5 that broke in were the ones that were going to do more time than anybody else. The HOA was gonna need to pay me for the damage that they caused, meaning buying me a new door. Luckily, they had not managed to go and sell my guns or other items on the black market or anything like that, so I was able to have them returned to me with no damage. Thank God for small favors. With all of these guys going to jail though, it raised the question of who was gonna take control of the HOA now. It was unmanned and now had kind of a dirty reputation because of what they did. Nobody wanted to take over and be confused as being associated with those guys or be the next ones that ended up in jail. The solution to this was actually genius in my opinion, so all of these older men who had run the board before decided to take their old roles back. This made people feel instantly safe because they knew that these men would never do anything to harm them. The first thing they did was remove all of the new rules that everybody hated and worked on rebuilding things a little bit. It took about 4 months for things to settle down before they made their next move. They had all stepped down from the HOA again, but this time decided to take it with them and just shut the whole thing down. They told us that we knew enough to be good people and we did not need a group trying to make sure that we are taking care of our own community. And yeah, Ripe Stars, as the saying goes, the best HOA is an HOA that just got shut down. And before we end the video, we will read one last story from r/maliciouscompliance. This one is titled, "They said don't touch it unless it's your job, so I didn't and it caught fire." So I work in a warehouse and a while back we got a new supervisor who was all about following protocol. His big thing was that no one should touch anything unless it was their exact job to do it. Well, one morning I noticed one of the older machines starting to smoke. I've worked with it before and knew what was happening, but I remembered the rule. So I let the supervisor know. He barely looked up and said, "Don't touch it unless it's your job." Alright then, I went back to packing. 10 minutes later the thing actually caught fire. We had to clear out the whole floor, maintenance took their sweet time showing up, the machine was toast. Production was shut down for the rest of the day. They quickly dropped the "don't touch anything" rule after that, and I just did what I was told. And yeah guys, thank you so much for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.